Hey, ladies. Hey, girls. We are live in this conversation around SROs in school. So, before we officially kick off, how about we start with some introductions? I'll go to a little bit of conversation, frame it, and then they get to just be in our living room, our group chat, as we talk about SROs in school. So, I am Femi Skeins. Currently, I am an educational consultant, but prior to that, I served as a principal in CPS, two different schools for 10 years.
Hi, I am Dr. Kenyatta Starks, and I am the CEO of Starks Consultants. Prior to taking this role, I was also a principal in Chicago Public Schools, in a charter school, as well as the suburbs. And I would say maybe about 15 years in leadership.
Hi, ladies. Beulah McLeod, Executive Director of Program Implementation for the Midwest Region for New Leaders, a national organization that trains school leaders across the country. We partner with districts to help them establish their leadership pipelines, and it's actually the program that I went through. And prior to moving into this role, I served as a CPS principal and assistant principal for about 14 years. Started a school from well, not from scratch. Reopened a school. I should frame it that way. Reopened a school, Daya High School for the Arts, to turn the school around. Michelle Clark on the West Side, where I served with my sister in the struggle. Well, she was on both of you guys. We were all on the West Side at the same time.
Yep.
All in neighborhood schools, and just excited to be having this conversation with you all today.
I was actually thinking about that B. I was like, man, well, so I don't know. Did you know that Kenyatta was one of my first principals when I came to CPS?
I did not know that.
Yes, when I was a teacher, she was
Wow.
yeah. So I'm like, this conversation has definitely come full circle. And then I was thinking, I was like, B and I connected actually when I was an assistant principal,
Yeah.
and she was already a principal, so helping me figure out the ropes. When I don't know, landed in the principalship. Some days I feel like I landed. So, for the context of those who are joining the conversation tonight, this really just organically surfaced. As many of you all probably heard last week, a decision has been made. The mayor of Chicago announced last week that next school year, school resource officers or police officers will be removed from Chicago public schools. And so I made a post to say that I actually have a lot to say about that. And I do have quite a bit to say about it. So Kenyatta, she chimed in like, we do need to talk about it. And then I said, well, let's get Beulah in on the conversation, because I think that the three of us have our experiences. I think our experiences, we could leave it at that, positions us to have a lot of opinions. So you all will get to see a very organic conversation. We have not scripted this. I really don't know their full opinions on it. They don't know my full opinions on it. So, hey, if we get into it, we get into it, but we're still sisters at the end of the day. So how about we just kind of open it up to the conversation about what is your opinion? Do SROs belong? And you know what? For this context, because we all were high school principals, I'm going to contextualize it and say, do SROs belong in high school? What are your thoughts?
B, I want you to kick it off.
Yeah, you are, because you're the wisdom in the group. We do look to you like, what is she going to say?
Listen, and so I was just saying prior to our going live that I feel like I was asked this question like several times. Prior to I'm hearing myself.
Okay, you got some feedback. Go ahead.
Okay, I feel like we've had this discussion a few times during the duration of like my leadership experience. I remember there was a time where they asked us if we wanted to have SROs and we could elect to have them or not. Some people chose not to have them and they were removed. And then I feel like a couple of years ago, they kind of put it in the hands of the LSC to make those decisions. And some people opted to keep them. Some people opted not to keep them. And so here's always been my stance on SROs. My SROs were never a disciplinary presence in the building. That's not how I ever used them, right? They were there for a couple reasons. One was to sort of break down the barriers between police and young people. Because as we know in our communities, we feel as though we're over policed and we feel like we're not, in some instances, human. And we feel like sometimes, in some cases, police officers do not understand our babies. And so what you don't understand or you don't have proximity to, you fear 90% of the time, right? And so I always serve, just as you ladies did, in tough neighborhoods. So Gage Park, the Austin community, and then Bronzeville, Washington Park, right there on 51st Street, right? All of which are really tough areas, if we're being honest. And so the way I used the SROs was to be mentors, a part of the fabric of the community. And also, like if something were happening outside of the school that would impact my kids in my school, I wanted them to be there to protect my children. So they never got involved in discipline issues. I had a dean, I made disciplinary decisions. It's not like if they got into it with a teacher, I'm calling the police. That was not how they functioned. We handled discipline. They handled police matters outside of the building that could impact us. And they became mentors, coaches. A couple of my, I'm thinking about Michelle Clark. One of my SROs ended up coaching a girls volleyball team. They had really close relationships with my girls and my boys. Like some of my kids would just go to their office on their lunch hour and just talk to them. So they were not criminalized or policed. And I think what has happened is the narrative around how they have been used in schools has gotten out of control. And people think in some cases they're walking around just arresting people. And that should not be happening. If that is, that's a conversation that needs to be had with the principal of the building, because you determine how you want them to be utilized and leveraged, right? So in my opinion, no, I don't. I wanted them there. I needed all hands on deck. Like we can't do this work by ourselves. So I needed community. I needed the police officers. I needed anybody and everybody who was willing to be a partner in the work with me to really do that. So that's my long but short answer. I'll pause and see what you guys have to say about it. But that's just always been the way I've kind of approached it.
So you must have been in my brain. I jotted down a couple of notes, and you hit on some key points. My very first response to do police officers belong in schools or not belong in schools? My issue with this is I have a problem with if there is a process in place that gives the community, it gives the local school councils a voice in making a decision that's about what's best for their school community. I have a problem with somebody being able to unilaterally come in and say, we're no longer utilizing a process that has already been established. Our schools will be in trouble if the people can no longer have a voice and make decisions about what's best for their schools. So I'm not so sure if this is completely about SROs for me, or if this is completely about our voice being taken away and somebody being able to come and make a decision, because then that sets a precedent for what else would they be able to make decisions about. In this particular instance, I'm not sure if people knew this already. Local school councils already had the authority to vote about whether or not they wanted SROs in schools. LSCs are already voted into position. So you have people who represent the school, and now we come back and say, nope, we don't care that there's a process. We're going to override it because this is, in my opinion, this is more about a political decision and not a safety decision. I have a problem with principals and those who are responsible for the safety of young people not being a voice at the table, because I want to know who was a voice at the table when this decision was made. Was it the principals who've had kids with their bodies laying on the ground in front of their schools? I'm going to think, because I know some of those principals, that the answer is no. Within the same 30 days that we've had young people violently, in my opinion, executed near schools, we say we don't need police officers. I'm not quite sure how that works.
Okay, ladies. So let me just say this. You all have touched some very good points. I agree with both of you all wholeheartedly. I do want to add too, like I agree, Femi. Like I feel like you are taking, if I was a principal, like I might need it. I might not need it. But now you've taken my ability to say what I need in my building because I'm there every day away from me. I do believe that officers are needed in buildings. Look at the school shootings that are happening, right? And yeah, we don't use them. When I was a principal, B, I didn't use them that way either. I didn't use them to police the building. However, it's also it's a great asset if they are there. I will give you a prime example. I had Commander Calloway who came into my building. He was not an officer in my building, but he came every Saturday and took my frequent flyers and did things with them. So just imagine if we said there were no police officers, then they were not able to actually have that relationship. So I'm confused as to why they would make that decision in this time right now, because I do think that not only do we need them, but we also need some healing just based on all the things that have happened with police and citizens in Chicago.
And to another point that B made earlier, I'm also concerned. We know, right? We're from Chicago. We get it. We have children, so we're not speaking as those who, we've raised our kids right here in Chicago. Kenyatta and I, we have sons, so we definitely know what it is to also be concerned about your sons in the city of Chicago and what it looks like for them to engage with the police. We know that sometimes there can be, more than sometimes, that there frequently can be contentious issues between the community and the police. The school provides a conduit to begin to heal those relationships. And when I think about Black and brown kids, if they never have positive experiences with police officers, how then will they go into those jobs? Right. And so there are a lot of things that go into it. I can give you all examples after examples of being able of having really strong relationships with SROs. When a school has an issue with the SROs over policing in the schools, that is not a policing issue. That is fundamentally an administrative issue. The police cannot walk around the school. They do not walk around the school policing, putting kids in handcuffs. In fact, unless it is some type of major disruption, the police usually are not involved until the school administration gets them involved. So if you have an issue where there's over policing, you have an issue with the administration at that school.
Yeah, that was my point, right? Like,
Yeah.
the leadership in the building tells SROs how to function. And so if you have a discipline issue and the first your knee-jerk reaction is to call the police into that, it's something wrong, right? That's your default, like that you want to criminalize a kid who may have had a negative interaction with the teacher. I will add this. I can't tell you how many things we have stopped from happening outside of the building because we had the police officers in the building. Okay. Like incidents that could have occurred but did not occur because some of my students had really good relationships with the SROs who could then tip them off to let them know in an anonymous way, right? Without being disclosed or called a snitch. Hey, you might want to think about this because after school, such and such, right? Having those conversations because there was a level of trust that was built. I agree with both of you all that if the process is already in place, why do we've talked about this for like 7 or 8 years now. I feel like I revisit this conversation and a lot of schools opted to not have them. So why are you taking it away from the people who feel like they may need it in some regards? I cannot imagine what would it have to be like if something is happening outside of my building at dismissal, and now I got to pick up the phone and call 911, as opposed to having people in the building who can automatically just get on their radios and say, hey, such and such is happening. We need backup. And I'm not even talking about like kids fighting or anything per se with each other, but these schools are in neighborhoods. These kids see other kids in neighborhoods. They interact with parents in that neighborhood. So sometimes it's a neighborhood to school issue. What do you do in that regard? 911? Okay. We'll
And
figure out
you got to
response time with that.
you got to remember that when we call 911, those police officers don't know our kids. When we have SROs in schools, they actually are a good bridge between the school and between the other officers in the district. I'm concerned about if you have to begin to call for any incidents, and I'm with you. It's not always fighting, right? It could be some community issues, it can be whatever, or it could be your kids. I say I have some days where my kids didn't always act like angels, right? And so maybe we did need some police to assist with a situation. If police have to assist with a situation, I would rather it be police officers that know my kids, right? That have a relationship with them, that can begin to diffuse the situation. But if you have all of these police officers that don't have relationships with kids, I find taking them out of schools is actually probably more problematic than having ones that know them already.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because I've had incidents where some police officers showed up who didn't know our kids, and the response was very different. And I didn't like the response because they didn't know. So they were like overzealous, right? But the ones who were in the building, they knew how to de-escalate very, very quickly. So no, I think you're spot on, Femi.
I'm thinking about one situation that just how it could have been really a deadly situation, but only because the SROs knew the student that they were able to de-escalate it in real time. Because had the other officers in the district, if they would have had to deal with that situation, they wouldn't have already known some of the young man's triggers. They wouldn't have known how to de-escalate them. And so those are very real things. And let's be honest. We're asking police to do so many different things. Right now, they have to be social workers, and now they have to understand childhood development. They're not coming in dealing with teenagers as children. Unfortunately, many of them are still coming in dealing with boys that are 17, 18. They're husky. They're sometimes not necessarily respectful. Now they're dealing with them like adults, which became now you have even more of a contentious situation.
Yeah, and I
We
was
got a couple of questions coming in too. One of them says, so do you think that they need to be at every school or those that select to have them?
I think it should be at schools that select to have it. I just think that like you should be able to make that choice. You're in that school every day. Excuse my dog, y'all, so y'all know this is live for real. Um, so you get to make that choice. Like nobody should make that choice for you because you also have to be mindful of your culture. And do people feel safe? Do your teachers feel safe? Are your students feeling safe? So I think it should be a choice.
I agree. It should be a choice. I started off saying at the beginning, I believe that the community should always have a choice in what happens in our schools. And I'm definitely not pleased that there was a process to make a choice, and that process was just taken away.
I agree. I think we all are aligned on this. There should always be community voice, right? And when I say community, I mean the stakeholders who have to live and breathe in that space every day, along with their parents and the community that's impacted. I don't think there's a one size fits all solution to any of this. So when you start making broad, sweeping decisions, trying to fit everybody into a cookie cutter sort of paradigm, it backfires. I think hyper correction to anything is not good. You can try to get at the issues that people face with SROs and maybe some of the challenges without, you don't have to apply a hammer to every problem. Some stuff is nuanced, right? And it's like the lack of a nuanced solution to this is what really sort of gives me pause and gives me a little bit of like I'm a little worried about, especially some younger principals sometimes who work in tougher schools. I think it's just our jobs as like, consultants or as district partners to help principals problem solve around safety and not just use the SRO, but have a comprehensive plan that, yes, acknowledges that we need social emotional supports, acknowledges that we need therapists and counselors and community partners to come in. But you can have a balanced approach to it, right? Haven't worked in difficult schools my entire career. You can have a balanced approach that can work.
So I one of the points that I want to make, and we say this all the time as school leaders, two things can be true at the same time. You can have additional social workers. You don't have to take the police out to bring something in. I want to segue us a little bit because here's one of the things that I said this doesn't even make logical sense to me, right? And I understand that when you're making decisions for a whole district, that there are a lot of things that you have to take into consideration, but there's a staffing shortage. So where are all of these social workers? Where are all of these clinicians that you're saying are going to replace police officers? I probably would be able to get behind the plan a little bit if those people were already selected and staffed. So you made the decision to take them out. We don't even know that we can hire as many clinicians as we would need to replace the police officers. I have put positions into my like out of my own budget to hire social workers. It took me forever to actually find one. So some of these that they're like, oh, we'll have this role and that role. Will we be able to staff those positions, or will those positions be sitting? And it gives the perception that we provided the resources, but the positions are sitting vacant.
Yeah, I just think it sounds good. And I think as a community, we don't push on what they are saying needs to happen. So, yes, it sounds good that they're saying social workers and psychologists and all these counselors. But we know in reality, if you actually served in the urban school anywhere, not just Chicago, you know right now that the positions are hard to fill. So, until we come together collectively to say, why are you making this decision? And nobody and somebody begins to challenge the decisions that are being made, we're going to continue to go down this rabbit hole. Because I will bet you that this board is not an elected board. When we move to an elected board, Beulah, as you said, you will be hearing this once again. We will be making another decision based on what people think should happen as they begin to fill these seats and make these decisions for our students.
So we got a couple of questions I want to highlight. So one person says that she used to work at a high school where police always used the school to get kids they needed to speak with. It was sometimes the SRO, sometimes other departments. How did you all handle that? I'll start and I'll start because I was the last one of the three of us that served in CPS. And so by the time Beulah and Kenyatta left, some of the guidance had changed. um let's just say that a young person got in trouble on the streets, or something happened. Police could not just come into the school. I will say that CPS, the Office of Safety and Security, have very clear guidelines for how school administration and school personnel had to deal with the police. They couldn't just come in and arrest a young person because they said I had a warrant for them. In fact, they could only come in and get that young person if it was something that was like an immediate safety, right? But if they had just violated something basic, no, they couldn't just come in and get them. So we can all acknowledge, in the past, maybe there were some practices that were ineffective, but I think that between CPD and CPS, they really work collaboratively to tighten up some of those procedures. I know that to be a fact, right? Even some of the information that I was able to give the police when I first became a principal, and the information that I would tell, and these are police officers that we had become friends. I'm like, I can't give you that information anymore. They would tell me, I can't give you that information. The two departments worked well to come up with this agreement. And I don't even think that we gave the agreement enough time to work before now we said, just take them out.
Yeah, I didn't let police take kids out of my building. I just didn't. Like you said, Femi, there's clear guidance and I followed it. If it were not an immediate safety issue where somebody was going to be harmed like in the next 30 minutes or something like, no. Because I wanted the school to be a safe place for kids. And the last thing I wanted them to believe was that, you know, they don't have that space to come to, even if they've messed up outside. Okay, I get it. There are consequences for your actions, but you can't take my kids out of my building. Like, I'm not, you know where they live. You know where they live. Like, you don't need me for that. You know where they live. You know that you can go get them when they leave school. But as far as school grounds, I worked really hard. I think there was maybe only one time where I could not get around it. But they tried, and this is like old school because, by like you said, Femi, by the time I left, even by the time I left, they had gotten a lot more granular about making sure kids were able to be in school safely. I don't know, Kenyatta, what was your
Yeah,
experience?
so I didn't let my students, I didn't agree with them taking kids out either. It definitely depends on the circumstances because I always led from what would I want if it was my own kid. And
Right.
so I really stood by that. If there were circumstances where kids need to be taken out, we had strategically had them walked out. You didn't go out the front door. You didn't get all, everybody didn't get to see you walking out. I wanted to contact the parent, but for the most part, like you couldn't do that. I also want to go back to like the whole SROs and how they treat kids. Like you couldn't come in there if I thought you were not a fit for the culture that I wanted to have, I would ask you to leave. Like I would just say this officer does not fit exactly what I need to have going on. So he don't need to be here. And when they came into the building, if they came into my building, rah rah, see you later. I don't need that. And so I just think that we are not paying attention to what is needed. And I just this I don't have a good feeling about this.
So, Kenyatta, what's funny is, I live in the neighborhood of the last school where I served as a principal. And so I had to go in the police station for something. In fact, I went in the police station one day. This was after I was no longer a principal, to drop off something to a police officer that was at work. And so the officers at the front desk, I felt like they were kind of cold to me, but I didn't think anything of it. Well, apparently through some conversations, they were so cold because the the comment was how much they couldn't stand me because they felt like I was always defending kids. And I'm gonna tell you in the words of my daughter, and Will, I'm absolutely going to defend. And so these officers, they probably were being overly aggressive with some of my students, and I'm sure I stepped in. I'm not a criminal, so I don't have a problem saying whatever I need to say. But it's just kind of funny. I'm with you. You can't come in here and treat my students any kind of way. I'll be the first to defend them. But honestly, when you have good SROs, you don't even have to do it because effective SROs will take care of that. Let's We have one question about the voice of students in this process. Let's talk about that a little bit
Was that
because they're
Antonio's
saying,
question on the screen? Can you put it back up?
yep, I can put it back up. So the question is basically saying like, well, did we interview, I'll put it up, students, because have we thought about their voice? It seems that it's been mostly students advocating to remove SROs.
Yeah, so and again, this is an administrative issue, right? So even when you have student voice, what I've found is that in a neighborhood school, kids kind of take on a disposition of, in a lot of cases, the administration as it pertains to that. If you are presenting your SROs as the ops, as the kids say, then they're going to view them as the ops. But if you're consistently engaging with them, they see you have a positive relationship. They see you like, good morning, how you doing? They're showing up at games. They're building their own relationships. I never had kids come to me and say, we don't want them in the building. I just didn't have it. Now, I'm sure in some schools you have that, but that's why I said every it should be the community's choice, and that includes children. I'm not excluding children from that process. Kids should have a voice as well, but it should still be a school by school basis, because I guarantee you, in a lot of the schools I served in, the kids found a great deal of safety in making sure and having them around. I'm just gonna say that. And not because there was a lot of stuff going on inside of the building once we got to a certain point. Initially, yes, but once we got to a certain point, it was pretty calm. They had to deal with, okay, now you having a conflict with somebody in the neighborhood and they got out of school early, and now they trying to come up to the school and get you. Or in some cases, I remember Kenyatta and I, right, like going to McDonald's, though, what's that, Roosevelt and Cassie?
Yeah.
Like we could look. She's at Marshall. I'm at Michelle Clark. I'm like, Kenyatta, come on, we got to go up here and get our kids and our babies and make sure we got them in check, right? So, yeah, I just think it's a case by case basis.
Mhm.
I think that there should never be a decision made about a school without the voice of kids. I don't care what the conversation is. Schools are not for adults. Schools are for children. So I think that they should be included in every conversation. And they were included in the conversation. So again, that's why I feel so perturbed. I think I'm actually, the more I think about this, where do we have SROs serving? Mostly in Black and brown neighborhoods, right? So now you're telling me that a government official can begin to make decisions for our community? That just doesn't sit well with me. But the process that was in place did include the voice of students. Before that LSC went to vote around whether they were keeping SROs another year, there was a lot of data collection. That data collection included, what did the parents have to say? What did the students have to say? Like all of these different groups. And then they looked at the data and made the decision. So the kids' voice has always been included. And I'm concerned that we have advocacy groups that are using a few students to push their political decision. Because I will tell you that I did that survey years and years, and my students, I had some students that didn't want them, but guess what the survey data said? That the kids actually did want them. So what we're hearing in the media, what we're seeing on the news, yes, there's some kids that don't want them, but there are also some kids that are they're being polished by an advocacy group that wants a kid to tell the story.
Yeah,
And
I,
kids
I
have
believe,
opinions on both sides of this.
yeah, I do think that they, kids should have a voice. Like the school belongs to the kids. I used to tell my teachers all the time, they're your customers, so you have to make sure that you're giving them exactly what they need. But I will say, as a result of this, I'm fearful that a couple of things will happen. Either they're going to be so many calls to the police station on a regular basis, and you all know, you keep calling the police, they're going to be like, I'm not going over to that school, right? And or the kids are going to take advantage of saying, okay, well, now we don't have the police present, rather they're using them as regular support, or whether they're using to police the building. Like, this is a huge concern, because again, all principals don't have the same level of skill set to be able to really stabilize and really know how to run their building culture wise, depending on what neighborhood you in. I did all turnaround. So when I walked into Inglewood, ain't no way at Harper High School I couldn't have police the first year or two. It's no way. And not that it was out of control, but it was in the beginning. But we were able to have that presence and help stabilize the building. So I'm really, this is concerning.
And I'm sure all of us have stories that we could share about things we could share with each other that we could never share publicly. If you started to share some things publicly, right, it would actually cause a little bit of pandemonium. But the truth of the matter is, we understand school safety at all levels. I just believe in a comprehensive safety plan. And I think that if we were going to get all of these clinicians in place and all of these other things, I wish that we would have made the move to get them in place before we pull them out, right? Like you don't take something away before you ensure that we'll be able to replace them. And social workers and police officers serve a different function. Like we're not really having that conversation. They serve a different function. And to say, well, as long as you have social workers, schools will be safe. Uh, where let me ask you like this in my doctoral language, where is the evidence that states that increasing social workers will decrease violence? Like, where have we seen that actually happen? And I want to see the model district, and I want to see the data, right? Was the district comparable to CPS? Because if we're talking about a school in downstate Illinois that's set on a farm, it's not comparable data.
Yeah, but Femi, I think one thing you said is true, right? I think what's happening is we're taking a political issue and applying political solutions to problems that may not have existed. It's like, what are we solving for? So anytime just in change management, when people start making sweeping changes, my first question is always, what are we solving for? What was the initial problem, right? And let's just say the problem was in some specific schools, children felt over policed. Okay. If that then is the case, why is the first thing just take them out as opposed to problem solving for what the real issue is? Maybe there needed to be a change in the SRO. I would key out on this. There was one time I did have a change. I called and was like, I don't want this person. Not a good fit. Give me somebody else. Right? That's a solution to that particular issue. But I just don't understand what we're solving for if there's a process in place. You can work with school leaders around how to leverage SROs, right? It seems like a very political solution in cases where some of these advocacy groups, I'm gonna keep it real, the people don't live in the neighborhoods that they that they claim to be trying to help, right? And
don't have kids in those schools.
Don't have children in those schools, and you purport to be my ally, but you're trying to tell me what's best for me. I have a problem with that. Because to me, it's another form of colonialism. If we being real, like what's different from you and the other person that says they know what's best for the community itself? Those solutions need to come from community. They don't need to happen to communities. And I mean, Kenyatta, the work at Diet was highly political. We had to make sure we honored the community. We had to make sure that we honored the sacrifices that they made. I dare not make a decision without talking to every stakeholder in the neighborhood, including teachers, parents, and kids, about, okay, what do we want to see happen in this particular context? Because this is our school. I live in this neighborhood too.
So
I'm concerned about the politicization of decisions like these and the subsequent potential fallout, because you got real human beings who are impacted by these, in some instances, not all, but in some instances, very political decisions. So, I mean, I know that's probably, that's not popular to say, but hey, I'm on the other side of it. So I'm just gonna say it. That's what it is in my mind.
yeah, and I keep asking myself as we're talking, if I was actually in a principal seat right now, what would I do?
What would I do? I was thinking the same thing.
Like what would I do? Like, would I try to advocate? Would I try to pull people together? Like, what would be my next move, knowing that I've only worked in neighborhood schools, right? So I know no other schools. What would I do? So I'm wondering about principals right now, and what are they actually thinking about, and how they actually going to be able to like be intentional and strategic about ensuring that their buildings remain safe.
I was sitting here, Kenyatta, thinking the next leg of our work as consultants might really be around helping them to build these safety plans, because if they've been utilizing SROs as a part of their safety plan, right, I think it would make sense for us to understand how they've been used. And with that resource being gone, what will be the alternative? They are going to have to do some deep thinking and deep planning between now and when school opens in August, because as a building leader, you have to also be able to stand up in front of every stakeholder group and to be able to talk about what your safety plan is, right? And so with schools that have depended on that, and we're not talking about depended on it like everything we run to the police, but you're talking about in some places taking out people who've been a staple as a part of the school community. So the principals have to be prepared to lead that conversation of, okay, without SROs in the building, what will it look like? Now, a couple of my former SROs, I've worked with some amazing SROs. I noticed that they're on. One of them said that it looks like they will have roving cars that are dedicated just for schools. So that might be one thing, Kenyatta, like if that actually happens, Okay, principals, do you know the pattern of the roving cars? What time will they be in your neighborhood? Where will they be situated? Is it going to be the same roving car? Is it the same shift? So I think that those are questions that we can kind of guide them around.
You know what? I always, even though I had SROs, I still always hired part-time police officers to supplement my security anyway. Because the truth of the matter is, part-time police officers, and this is a hack for any school leaders that are out there, you don't have to pay them benefits. They're on an hourly rate, but they still represent sort of a police-like presence in your building. They have those relationships, those connections. And if you didn't, for me, in a case where like Kenyatta had to go into turnaround situations, the security they provided to me, I needed more. To be quite honest, I needed more bodies. So what I would do, honestly, is still have part-time police officers on my staff. I would.
But
Where
can they now?
they didn't say they couldn't.
So that's definitely, if we have any school administrators, that is definitely a question that I would ask is, can we still have part-time officers? Because you're right, they're not deployed to the school. Yeah, that might be something to think about. There's another comment that just says, another true issue. What's going to be the priority? If we're calling the police for something and there's something else that's going on in the community, what's going to be the priority?
The community. Or if I can tell you this hands down, because me and Gerald was at Robeson and I was at Harper. And I promise you, if there was an issue at any other school, we were last on the totem pole, only because they knew that at this point we had our schools together. But even as a consultant, I'm in school districts where they ask for police presence and they'll say, oh, well, we don't know because something else may be happening, or the school down the street is getting out at the same time. That's not my problem.
There was a time, and actually my former one of my former SROs that I mentioned is on. Amazing, right? Like some of the stuff that they did as a department outside in the 11th district, they put on a cotillion for the kids, and this is on their own time with their own resources. But I remember on SAT day, we went through a couple of iterations of this, but how did it? No, whatever it was, ninth and 10th graders were testing in the building. 11th and 12th graders still had to come to school, right? So I was like, okay, I got to figure out something to do with these 11th and 12th graders. So we had this whole like community day. Well, we took them to a community center. It was all fitness. It was all team building. We loaded up all of the kids and we took them. It was just a few miles from school. I begged the commander. I was like, listen, she is such a part of our school community. I know we won't be, because if there are no kids in the building, they will take the SROs out that day, right? I said, can she please just go with us? She's such a part of it. Like, just let her go. The commander says, yes, she can go ahead and go, because she's still on duty. Don't you know, just as we were getting ready to leave the school, leave the facility, something happened by the school. Well, there was like a neighborhood shooting. Somebody was boarded up with, it was all kind of stuff happening. They were, so it was one officer with us, one officer that was back at the school. They were able to coordinate in real time to hold the buses. Had she not been with us, we might not have gotten notified that we needed to hold those buses, because we would have been bringing those kids back in at the same time that this was going on. That's just one example of, like, in real time, these are the kind of anecdotal stories that I'm like, well, have you asked us how we use them? And I just think about that. Like, we had to hold those kids back for a long time because it took them a minute to get the guy that was barricaded across the street from the school in a gun with a gun. I just, as a school leader, being responsible for safety, that's a heavy load to carry.
Especially at the high school level. I mean, it's hard at any level,
Yeah.
but you guys know, from having to make sure the school is safe to making sure sports activities are safe. Like, we haven't even touched on dances, sports, because the sports component at a high school is like you almost need another person,
a task force,
just for sports, because it's so complex at the high school level, especially if you got like a Marshall, a Morgan Park, the high profile, the Simeons, the Whitney Youngs, the Kenwoods. I had it a little bit with Michelle Clark and Diet, but not on y'all level, because the teams and just all the press and media around it requires so much more planning when it came to safety, or when it comes to safety. And we would do that during the day with the police officers. Okay, we got these games. This is going to be, can we have some extra cars when they get out of blah, 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 blah. And we didn't have to pick up the phone and necessarily, because they could coordinate all of those things, right? And so again, man, I'm just like, I feel like we taking a hammer trying to solve a problem that maybe needs a screwdriver. I don't know if we're using the right tool to I'm not saying there have never been issues, because we can acknowledge that some people haven't always used them appropriately, or they've been good. We've seen it, right? Yeah. But do you take away the autonomy of the community because you've seen some instances that did not work? Yeah. I don't know if that's wise.
And B, I even think about dismissal.
Yes.
Right? So I remember at Harper, like, my police officers would block off the street so that we wouldn't have people coming down. I didn't have to call and get that additional support, because I had the officers there in the building to be able to assist with that. So I think that they've probably bitten off more than they can chew, because they've had them in some schools and some not. But now nobody have them. It's going to look different.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done. So, I mean, it's been a good conversation. It's unfortunately, water under the bridge now. I feel bad for my colleagues who are still sitting in those seats, because when you ask the question of what would you do if you were still in the seat of a principal, like, let's be honest, right? This is still their careers. Especially newer principals, by the end, we all were vocal. We stood on, what it is that we had to say is, like kids, I'm standing on business. Many of them don't have that political capital yet. So they cannot necessarily stand up and voice these kinds of things. But I'm talking to principals every week, looking at them with tears in their eyes about, and we haven't even gotten to the egregious uptick in adult behavior, parent behavior. Like, there are some things that the police will help mitigate. We keep thinking about students. No, let's think about the visitors, and let's think about these adults. So I feel bad for my colleagues who, many of them may not have been positioned to be able to give their honest positions, because they also have a career to protect.
So that's girl, that's a whole nother podcast, because let me say this. One of my friends, Augie, refers to me as the principal's principal. And anybody I mentor, I try to tell them, like, you have to stand your ground, because I've said it so many tables where I've allowed for my values and my leadership identity to not shine in that space. No, you speak what you have to say, because at the end of the day, you got to go to bed and you got to go to sleep. And I'm saying that through experience. I think if I had to rewind my leadership journey, I would want to have spoken up, right? Whether I was a first year principal or a second year principal, because I believe that it will help the next group that's coming along. And so I'm hoping that principals have the courage to step up and speak up, because, I mean, at the end of the day, it's their schools. They're going to have to deal with it. And you all know that in any system, you can go from sugar to SH in a minute for any little thing that you do. So I always tell my principals that I coach, cover your tracks, dot your I's, cross your T's, and make sure you're doing exactly what you would want somebody to do for your own child.
Yeah, and I just think, so if I were in the seat right now, and this is always how I approached it, because from year one I spoke my mind. I just did. But what I was wise enough to know was that everybody had their own self-interest, right? And so my thing was, how can I appeal to this person's self-interest and still get what I need in this situation? Which is why I said, we know that optically the issue is they don't want over policing in schools. Fine. Pull the SROs. Can I have part-time police officers? Nobody knows who a part-time police officer is versus another security guard. Nobody knows that. Nobody could identify that in my building. I knew it. Nobody else knew that. So if optically you're trying to protect your own self-interest because you don't want police in the building, fine. These are part-time police officers who are not on the clock. Yes, they have jobs. They've worked for the force at some point, but they are not serving in the capacity of a police officer. Yet they still have the connections, the ability to get messages through quickly, the ability to get certain information. To me, that creates a win-win, because you get to have your political symbolism. You won, you took them out. I get to have functionally what I know works in a school building. Win-win. So how I would coach principals is to say, identify that person's self-interest and see how you can tap into it and create the win-win. Because otherwise it's like, okay, I'm saying what I want to say, but if it's not helping them, they're not going to capitulate. That's just how human nature works. I hate to say it, but that's politically how human nature works. So I don't know.
Well, let's wrap up. Antonio gives us a really good question. And I think that this will be a good closing, especially now because we all serve as leadership coaches. We all serve as, consultants in some kind of way. Let's wrap it up with, what advice would you all give to new admin that no longer have SRO support?
I just gave my answer.
Well,
I just gave my answer.
You got to teach them to have some courage. They don't all have that kind of courage, B. You gotta coach them with that.
I don't know. It's just like, can you live with this decision without knowing you at least tried? I mean, creative insubordination. And we say that in our own groups, right? Like, you have to do what's in the best interest of children. Talk to your network chief, right? First of all, talk to your coach, whoever your coach is, whether it's Kenyatta, Femi, us, whoever. Talk to your coach. Understand the political frame that's in your community. Number two, do you have the support of your community? Because a lot of times I didn't have to say anything. Y'all know how vocal diet folks were. They'd be down at the board meeting in a minute. I didn't have to say anything. They were my advocates a lot of times. Like, they, as parents and community members, would go down and say, hey, we want to advocate for this particular thing. And then three, your network chief. Like, you need to be having candid conversations with your network chief about your concerns and problem solving. I'm not being facetious when I say I would be thinking about how to leverage part-time security officers, part-time police officers, and see if that's something that they would allow us to do. I'm not saying that tongue in cheek. I really mean that. So I'll stop and pause because I want to take up all the airtime. But
yeah, I think for me, I would also say if you are able to get part-time police officers in your school, I agree with that. I was the part-time queen. And so I will say this too, like, my husband is a Chicago police officer, so I was always able to, like, reach out and know people that were genuine about doing what they needed to do. But I will also say to them, like, you have to be courageous, right? These are times where you have to make that step, and you have to know who you are as a leader, and you have to make the best decision for students in your community. And so, yes, they made a decision that you had no say so in, right? So how do you leverage that to get exactly what you need in the building, and you all pull together to come up with that intentional safety plan, right? And making sure that your voice is heard. And you don't have to do it in a disrespectful way. You can do it in a way where you're advocating for what you need in your building. And I would just say, please be courageous. Please do not step away from who you are as a person and as a leader, because you feel like your voice won't be heard, or you may be reprimanded for whatever you may decide to do in advocating for what you need.
So I agree with all of those. And a couple of things that I probably would do right now is I probably would spend some time doing a deep dive and understanding how if I had SROs, how was I utilizing those SROs, right? I would really make sure that I understood that. And then I would begin to strategize around, now, if I'm taking those out, then how am I going to shift those responsibilities or expectations to who, to what would that look like? So I would really spend some time with an admin team thinking about, okay, how do we begin to transition these responsibilities? That would be one thing that I would do. I would really go back and review those safety plans. A lot of times, I've seen it. where safety plans become another compliance tool. Safety plans cannot be a compliance tool because you don't know how much you need a safety plan until you need a safety plan. And the reason that I would say probably all three of us were able to run schools well is I knew my safety plan like I knew my instructional plan. That when people entrust their children to me, my goal is to keep them safe. They rather me give them a safe kid then like they'll give me a little bit of grace if the instruction is not there. They don't give me any grace about their kid being safe, right? So making sure that I know the safety plan. And then another thing that I would say, especially to new leaders, is start going to those police district community meetings. They need to know you. They need to know who you are as the building leader. They usually have some type of community policing meeting once a month. Go over to those meetings. You could take an hour out your day to go know them. And then my final point would be the safety of the school is not on the principal alone. So go ahead and engage a good team. Make sure that there's some the voice of the young people in there, and the voice of the young people should actually also be some kids that push it a little bit too much, right? So you need to have a cross section of kids represented. Don't go get all of the top 10 kids that never get in trouble. They might have a different opinion. Go get you some kids that could have potentially had to engage with the police and see what they have to say. So that's my advice to new principals. And of course, we're always available. So that's our pitch at the end. I feel like this is going to make us think about some other ways that we might be able to support principals during this transition. This is the planning time for next year between now and the summer. So, whether you're using Starks Consulting, whether you're using Leadership Edge, I know you're doing some consulting work, feel free to reach out to us. And if it's work that, we don't have the bandwidth to do, we're able to connect you with other people. So thank you all for logging on. This is just an organic conversation with the three of us. Again, this doesn't represent anybody but our own thoughts and opinions. We've been through some stuff.
Right. It's definitely my own thoughts and opinions, not my organization's for sure.
Yes.
And I experience being in the trenches with my sisters on this call here.
Yep. So thank you all for logging on. Maybe we'll come back another month, another time, and explore another topic. So good night, everybody.
Good night. Have a good one. Bye-bye.